Donbas, the world's most industrialized region, which is currently a war zone. But there are also other problems. Sinkholes in cities like Donetsk, rivers polluted with heavy metals, contaminated drinking water throughout the whole region, and finally, potentially 2 million people forced to be resettled from both Ukrainian government-controlled and separatist-held territories. According to scientists, this could happen in 5, maximum 15 years. And the main reason is mass flooding in the region's mines. All the samples show very high quantities of salt, very high water mineralization.
The flooding has already started in Snizhny, Donetsk, Krasnodon, Lysychansk. Gas has reached people's basements and garages. There are already victims. There is a threat. If the radioactivity escapes, it will travel in the direction of the Azov Sea. Near Stanitsa Hundurovska, the Siversky Donetsk River crosses the Ukrainian border and flows onto Russia's Rostov region.
When we talk about a lack of air or poisonous water, a person can only tell that something is wrong when it's already too late. You're suffocating and the water is not suitable for drinking. The irreversible processes in the Donbas have already started, and the region may soon become a new exclusion zone. But not all is lost yet, and much can be done. Ukrainian and international scientists have gathered information about the risks. 3 Ukrainian and 1 international organization conducted this research. The Ukrainian Ministry of Ecology has already used this information in their publication. The research indicates that the rivers in the Donetsk region have a higher concentration of nitrogen, phosphorus, and non-radiation strontium. Based on this analysis, we consulted with scientists and worked out a possible disaster scenario.
This is a regular mine. There are over 200 of them in Ukraine's Donbas region. The miners have to pump the groundwater. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the Donbas mines started closing down, one after another. But the groundwater needs to be extracted even in the mines that no longer operate. It's not always possible, though. Sometimes fighting prevents it. Sometimes there just isn't the funding to do it. So uncontrolled flooding in the mines has already started. Underground Donbas looks just like Swiss cheese. Many mines, all of them interconnected. Once one mine is flooded, the water reaches the next one. Dirty water can even end up above ground, and that would contaminate local springs and rivers. The Siversky Donetsk River, the main water source in the Donbas, is under threat. And so are all the wells from which people extract drinking water. There are thousands of them. But that's only part of the issue. The mine waters can reach the ground very fast, which would feel like a slow earthquake and damage buildings. No area in the Donbas is immune to this, regardless of where it is located in relation to the front line. But there's more. In Soviet times, nuclear experiments were carried out at the Yunkom mine located near the town of Yanakievo. Today this mine is closed down, but it is difficult to predict what will happen if it gets flooded by uncontrolled water flows. This region also has chemical plants and leftover chemical waste. The mine waters can reach them too. If no measures are taken, Donbas will turn into one poisonous puddle, leaving over 2 million locals with no access to drinking water. Over 80 mines could close down all at once in 2018, making this situation more likely.
How likely is such a scenario?
Yes, it is likely to happen, and everything is leading up to it.
Geologist Yevhen Yakovlev was meant to receive a reprimand from the Communist Party in May 1986. A month prior to the Chernobyl disaster, he went to the Nuclear Energy Department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in Moscow to warn them about the risks that he saw during an experiment at the ill-fated reactor number 4. They were drilling wells next to the plant and noticed anomalies. Later on, the geologist received a reward for his Chernobyl liquidation efforts. He worked at the plant after the disaster.
I had an impression that something like a mechanical water boiler was submerged in the ground. When we noticed this effect, the local Ukrainian authorities told us that there's nothing they can recommend. Go to the Nuclear Energy Department in Moscow, they said. So we went there and showed them this material, and they received it quite negatively. They declared us enemies of nuclear energy, There was a presidium of Ukraine's Academy of Sciences, but they also gave us a scolding. That was in March 1986. During that time, at the recommendation of the Nuclear Energy Department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, they gave me a reprimand as an enemy of the nuclear energy development in the Soviet Union. And then came April, and then I worked alongside the Chemical Corps.
Forged by Chernobyl, then the head of the Soviet Ukrainian Ministry of Geology headquarters for hydro and ecological works, Yakovlev managed to stop the construction of nuclear plants in Crimea and Odessa due to the risks. Billions of Soviet rubles had already been spent on them. To achieve that, he had to reach out to the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union himself, Mikhail Gorbachev.
We detected some major errors in the construction of the nuclear power plant, even by international standards. For example, it shouldn't have been done on oil and gas fields. The Crimean nuclear plant was being built on a spot where there are gas deposits. We analyzed the gas deposits, drilled the well, and got a fountain-like eruption of dirt. That's what made us conclude that the nuclear plant was not built in a suitable area.
These days, Yakovlev is the main science associate at the Institute of Telecommunications and the Global Information Space of Ukraine's National Academy of Sciences. For 20 years, he worked as an expediter in western Donbas, and then in the Ministry of Geology. He has dedicated the last 17 years to science. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Yakovlev teamed up with international organizations and started analyzing ecological changes in the conflict zone. He's now been across the entire front line, including Pisky, near the now destroyed Donetsk airport, and Shirokina, near Mariupol. The scientist explains, despite the risks, it's difficult to push the government into action, mostly because of a lack of coordination.
It became notably harder to explain and push someone to react. When we realized that the anti-terrorist operation will not end soon and the number of mines that have not been manually closed down is only rising, we went to the checkpoints, to the closed mines, spoke to the staff there. And some places turned out to be even more dangerous than we expected, in particular in terms of water and gas. The processes have already started, and those levels are rising practically in every blocked mine. In towns like Snizhny, Donetsk, Krasnodon, Lysychansk, mines are flooding. You are correct about the ground and houses being deformed. That process has started, and it can take on catastrophic forms. And the third point is about the gas circulation. It has already reached people's basements and garages. There are already victims.
Жертвы уже были.
To see the flooded mines for ourselves, we go to the Donbas. This is Donetsk, a town that is practically next to the separatist-controlled Horlivka. Its official title is the City of Miners. Donetsk is located right on the front line. Here you can find mines that are connected to the ones in the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, mines that are difficult to access because of the shelling, and mines that were closed down prior to the war. Donetsk has been renowned for its coal mining since the 19th century. Then the local villagers would mine it themselves and take it to Crimea.
Це шахта Южная, Південна. This is the South Mine. It's located in Donetsk. And that is Horlivka, so this is practically the front line. This mine is 150 years old. It ran out of coal and a decision was made to close it down when the war started. Of course, it was significantly damaged. There are around 20 employees left who try to do quality work. But it's very difficult to pump the water because of where the mine is located.
Ситуація, коли в такій території нормально їх закривати дуже складно.
Yes, that's all because of the mines and explosions. It was damaged by the explosions. One of the workers was killed because of the shelling at this place.
Is there shooting?
Shooting happens. Occasionally it happens. It's not that it's quiet all the time there, but occasionally it happens.
What is the situation? Do I understand correctly that this mine is getting flooded?
Yes, we stopped extracting coal, but there was no way to pump out the water. All the power lines were damaged by the shelling. It keeps getting flooded. The water just flows in. It can be pumped as part of the Severnaye mine liquidation project. They will pump the water there all the time, but they won't do it here. It's a civilized process. You can't just say that it's been bombed and that's it. Of course, it's hard to work under such conditions, but nevertheless, we don't abandon the enterprise and let it get looted.
All the shrubbery here makes you think you're in an exclusion zone. Actually, the people only left a couple of years ago, when the conflict started. This is a street where miners lived. And this is what the neighbouring Donbas mine looks like. It has been scheduled to close down since 2004. The mine was considered dangerous because of its random gas emissions. Underground, it is connected to the mines in Russia-occupied Hromadske. Therefore, it is also at risk of flooding. And this is one of the biggest mines in the city. It's called Central.
My name is Viktor Davidovich Gert. I am a director of a mine.
Viktor Hurt is an honored miner in Ukraine. He's been working in this mine since 1970. Since those days, it has worked non-stop, even during perestroika and when the separatists tried to seize the town.
We managed to maintain coal production diplomatically. It was extracted even during Ukraine's difficult times in the 1990s. We paid people their salaries, and that's how we managed to save our team. At a certain point, I made the decision to not let any militaries in here. They suggested we close it down and flood it. But a mine is an uninterrupted process. Stop the work there for a day or two and it will be lost. And there, where Hromadske is, mercury used to be extracted, 540 meters underground. Can you imagine if the water reaches those levels and then somehow manages to come up to the surface? If we let that happen, if this water reaches the Siversky Donetsk River, we can get a disaster worse than Chernobyl. Our task is to finish this war as quickly as possible. Maybe they don't understand the situation there, especially in the Hromadske mines. I know many miners there. Russia allegedly provided them with a document that allows them not to pump out water. But there's the issue of water reaching the ground level, so keeping it from reaching the 500-meter mark, that's the main task. You know that miners like to say that we don't extract coal from nature, but steal it. And that's why nature takes revenge.
The situation is similar in all the mines in the grey zone, between government-controlled and separatist-held territory. This is Zolotoye coal enterprise in Ukraine's Luhansk region. Here, on government-controlled territory, around 500 workers have to pump waters every day because, from time to time, the neighbouring mine in Russian-occupied Hromadske gets flooded. They have 4 shifts every day. The work didn't even stop when there was serious shelling and the mine lost electricity.
Oh damn, there were 6 tunnels in this mine. 6 tunnels, 6. They kept pouring the coal and we extracted 3,000 tons each day. And who needs the coal industry now? Nobody. The youngsters, I feel sorry for the youngsters. They got scammed in Kiev. They came to work and were screwed over. Where did they come to work? In a mine.
Уголек рубать, не борщ хлебать.
This is part of a documentary filmed in 1956 at the Trudovsky mines in Donetsk. They have enough coal to last for 100 years. And this is what they look like after the shelling when Donetsk was occupied. We went there in December 2014. People lived in the company's bomb shelters. And back then, 3 years ago, they had already stopped extracting coal and only pumped water, but the miners didn't get their salaries. The Trudovsky mines are state property and they belong to Ukraine. If it wasn't for the checkpoints, you'd be able to make it from Trudovsky to government-controlled town of Marinka in half an hour.
Це державна
And this
служба.
is the Ukrainian State Institute of Geology and Mineral Resources that was evacuated from occupied Donetsk to Bakhmut. The scientists are trying to study what is happening to the 200 mines that are located both on government control and uncontrolled
Також на
territories.
непідконтрольній
The
території.
geologists confirm it's not scaremongering. We're speaking of real flooding risks. The sketches of the underground connections between the mines on both sides of the front line prove these risks are real.
Дійсно,
The water deep underground is more aggressive and saltier. That's true. One way or another, it will get into the building's foundations. That can happen. This can happen in central Donetsk, as I said, from the Gorky Street to the Universitetska Street and southbound.
Many geologists and miners agree. Coal enterprises on the territories of the so-called DPR are closing down and getting flooded. Contacts with colleagues who remained in the self-proclaimed DPR and LPR are informal and frowned upon. Ukraine's Ministry of Ecology confirms that 36 mines were fully flooded and their work cannot be resumed. There is no water pumping in the entire region, from Horlivka to Yanakieva in Hromadske in the Luhansk region, in parts of Donetsk, Makiivka and Shakhtarsk. We also need to consider the 2,500 illegal mines. Mihailo Volinets is the head of the Independent Trade Union of Miners of Ukraine. They try to retain contact with miners on the other side of the front line.
Люди переміщуються.
People are moving. We stay in touch with them all the time. These are regular miners, my friends and relatives, engineers who moved to the Ukrainian-controlled side and got jobs in our mines. There are at least 94 coal mines left in the occupied territories. These are the ones that operated stably, but today there are only 28 to 30 mines that are running. In the mines in central Donbas, Horlivka, Yanakieva, all the mines have been dealt with in a savage way, shut down, abandoned, looted, and people were stripped of their jobs. There are 5 mines in and around the city of Krasnodon, and since the beginning of the year they practically haven't extracted anything. Why? There isn't a market for it. Russia, which sometimes takes the coal from the occupied territories because of its high quality, doesn't want the coking coals because they have too much of their own and don't know what to do with it. The Ukrainian-controlled territories do not receive coking coals any longer.
This footage shared by the self-proclaimed DPR shows the Yukon mine in Yanakieva. Back in 1979, a nuclear experiment was carried out here. It was meant to mix up the ground layers. This mine used to be considered one of the most dangerous mines in the USSR due to its methane emissions. But the experiment proved to be unsuccessful and the emissions did not stop. A glass capsule containing radiation compounds was hidden 900 meters deep in the ground. It is still there. The mine closed in the early 2000s, and since then, they have pumped water from the mine. The leaders of the self-proclaimed republics claim that everything is under control. The Ukrainian government is also aware of this dangerous site.
We understand that there is a threat of radiation leakage, but it is very minimal. It's under our control. The international community knows about it, and we just need to watch it and keep it under our control. There are ways to minimize the danger, but the risk will still be there.
40 years after the nuclear experiment, water and air tests showed there is no danger. The main thing is that the water must not reach the capsule.
If the cavity is disrupted and the radioactivity escapes, it will travel in the direction of the Azov Sea, which is where the town of Mariupol is. According to DPR representatives, the Yukon mine is under partial wet conservation. The water levels at the neighboring mine are kept under control. The water is pumped to the mine that is connected to it, so the levels are kept more or less stable.
И уровни держатся более-менее стабильно.
The Donbas mines have only been flooded once, during the Second World War. Then the Soviet Union needed 5 years to get rid of all the water.
The deepest mine in the Donbas stopped pumping, flooded by the Germans. The heroes of the Donbas tamed an underground river. 5 million cubic meters were pumped out. Black Sea divers were the first to work underground.
After the war, the amount of coal extracted increased significantly. Now, as the geologists and miners say, the Donbas underground looks like Swiss cheese.
I worked at the Stakhanov mine. These days it's called Kapitalna. There were almost 200 kilometers of mine excavations. That's longer than the Kyiv subway. And that's just one mine. Imagine if the subway started getting flooded. How much water is that?
Depending on the mine's depth, water pumping itself could cost around 1/3 or even a half of the enterprise's running costs.
It is truly expensive, but I don't see anyone putting in effort. There's hole after hole. There are pre-war mine excavations, and there are no proper maps.
The most effective way to avoid the mining-related risks during the war would be an organized and controlled closure of all the Donbas mines. But that would be a controversial political and social issue. Ukraine does not have such a plan. But ending all the underground works and not spending money on them would not work. The countries that provide the clearest examples of modernizing and closing their mine industries are the United Kingdom and Germany. They retrain their miners and turn some of the mines into cultural centers and centers for green energy, but they still face the consequences of all the damage they did to nature. Germany has been mining coal since the 14th century, and it started closing down its mines 50 years ago. These photographs were taken in 2009. 3 people died as a result of a landslide in a region where mines turned into lakes. This year, Germany's last mine is planned to shut down. This research shows that modern mine pumps can operate for 25 years, but water pumping will carry on even after that.
Underground mining lowers the water table. In the heart of German coal country, it had the effect that one-fifth of the Ruhr basin fell under groundwater level. Water has to be pumped out of the ground constantly long after the end of active exploitation. This includes the long-term retention of the mine water table at an environmentally acceptable level through pumping it above ground.
The United Kingdom, which started closing down its mines in the 1980s, still pumps water from them. Trade unions of miners in Sheffield confirm this to Hromadske.
Yes, our mines are still flooded and the pumps extract water while the areas around the mines are being constantly monitored.
Люди добрі, не дають до смерті дожити. Як оце можна жити на голову?
В село Вербки пришла беда.
A disaster has come to the Verbki village.
Его ожидает та же участь, что и село Благодатное, которое исчезло с лица земли вместе со знаменитыми на всю округу садами.
The streets have collapsed. It's all because of the mines.
This is an excerpt from the 1988 film The Earth Which Feeds Us. Buildings were damaged in Verbsky, a village located between Dnipro and Donetsk, because of mine water flooding.
Подивися, наче все к концу підходить. Хіба там можна жити? Та там страшні щелі на городах, кругом були щелі. О, там, піди, подивися, яка щель, кинеш палку, вона зашумить, бо знакуди вона зашуміла. Хто накуди зашуміла та палка?
Similar sinkholes and landslides have occurred in the now-occupied town of Stahanov. Moving entire streets or villages is painful even during peaceful times, and we can only imagine how difficult it must be to do it somewhere in the grey zone, especially during war.
There is land deformation in Horlivka, Donetsk, and Lysychansk. The foundation first loses its firmness, then the buildings start to sink unevenly, cracks start to appear.
Does it happen?
Yes, it happens. We've had this since time immemorial, but now it will turn into a mass phenomenon because the water will reach all the surfaces.
Теперь это станет массовым, потому что вода подойдет по всей площади.
The storage of chemical waste is clamped within 400 meters of both sides. A children's theatre is quoting the head of the OSCE monitoring mission. It is an amateur theatre located in the frontline town of Hromadske, but performing in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. The play is called Letters to an Unknown Friend from New York. But this isn't America's New York. Rather, that was Novhorodske's name before 1951. One of its founders chose the name after a trip to the US. Having New York in the title is supposed to attract the audience's attention and make them learn more about the reality of war. The actors who come from this mining town next to occupied Horlivka speak about the dangers of miners' work during the war and of shelling at the chemical plant. We hear the recording of the voice of Viktor Hurt, the head of the central mine in Toretsk, whom we've met. He is describing the risks the miners face during the war. The residents of Hromadske come to Donetsk to work in their coal mines.
Ми в Новгородському, це під контролем.
We're in Novgorodsk now. It's controlled by the Ukrainian government, but according to the map, 25 kilometers away is occupied Horlivka. This is an important mining center.
Видобувний центр. Аня – ведучий хімік лабораторії.
Anna is the leading chemist of the Seversky-Donetsk Water Resources Department. She will help us take water samples according to scientific
Брати ці
standards.
проби води за правилами і розкаже, як вони відбуваються.
We are taking water samples to determine oxygen levels, the nitrogen group, and heavy metal salts.
Earlier water quality tests involving Yevhen Yakovlev showed pollution in the Luhansk and Donetsk regions exceeded the allowable norms by 90%. The water tested was from 35 different springs in the territory controlled by the Ukrainian government, and 26 of those held by separatists. It is actually not that difficult to do across the front line. You can watch how we did it. You just need to draw some water from a regular well or reservoir. They are not guarded by the separatists. 2 water samples were taken near Novhorodsk and Toretsk. These spots were recommended by the Seversky-Donetsk Water Resources Department. We worked together with their chemic. 3 water samples were collected near Kurakhov. There's a big mining enterprise called Solidivuhilye nearby. We headed to the coordinates that were provided to us to compare the current situation with the information from previous research.
Зливаємо першу пробу, да? Дивись.
I would prefer to say it's tasty, but it's okay.
Is it salty?
No, it's not salty.
Да, вона така.
It doesn't have any taste. Maybe that's my personal taste, but sometimes there is a better water, but this water is rather okay.
А можна
Can
вас
I call you?
позвати или к вам зайти? Мы хотим сказать,
This place where people drink water, Sonsivka, it's called like that now, where they draw the water.
люди воду в течение года.
Right in this well.
Всегда.
All the time?
Yes.
Ну да. Вообще есть. Какая вообще
Is
вода?
there any other drinking water?
There isn't. Every house has a well, but it's not drinking water. It's salty or bitter, but definitely not for drinking. This well is the only well left. This is the only source of drinking water. We have our own well for our allotment. Every house has one. But water for cooking and drinking can only be drawn from here.
And everyone comes here?
Yes, the most important thing is that even the most distant streets bring trolleys, water cans, and come here. They used to clean this well and wash the stones, but nobody cares anymore. Nevertheless, they draw the water out.
Do you have enough?
In hot months like August and September, we don't. I remember water flowing in the streets, but I was little. It was 1986 or 1988. In towns and cities, the water that goes into the pipes is cleaned and comes from centralized sources. But in many villages, people drink water from wells. But now there is a war. They use new wells, water fountains, that are not monitored. Dirty water can get in there. We leave half of the water in the lab in Slavyansk and take part of it with us to Kiev for the test. We receive the results in a couple of weeks. 2 laboratories produce similar verdicts.
Мы получили результаты по тем пробам, которые вы привозили.
We have the results from the samples you brought us. And of course, it is very sad. All the samples show very high quantities of salt, very high water mineralization. And even if you just look at the mineralization, this water is absolutely not suitable for drinking. In comparison, the water hardness in Dnipro River is the equivalent of 4 to 5 milligrams per liter. It's 5 to 10 times less hard than the water we tested. You can compare it to the water from a not very salty sea, which you can use for technical purposes, but you would not be able to use it to water houseplants. My first impression was that it's horrible. I cannot even comprehend how people can drink it. I can only feel for them. Not only is this water not pleasant to the tongue, it can lead to health complications, salt accumulation, risks of heart and kidney diseases. I think that people shouldn't drink such water. It's just unthinkable.
Не должны люди пить, это просто невозможно.
Нам говорили,
People told us that near Butovka mine there is irreversible pollution and salinization in a well. 3 years after the mine was closed down, they started tasting the rise in the water's hardness and saltiness. I took the location into consideration, the incline and all the other factors, and I realized that it's a signal that these processes will get more frequent when the number of flooded mines rises to the dozens.
The comment we received most often during our Donbas trip was, "We always had ecological problems." But we're not talking about poor water quality here. We're talking about the line when the water becomes unacceptable for consumption. The ecologists' research shows the Seversky Donetsk River already has higher than normal levels of phosphorus and nitrogen concentrates. And this river is the main drinking water source in eastern Ukraine. 90% of the Donetsk region's population and 30% of the Luhansk region's population depends on this river. The river flows from Ukraine into Russia's Rostov region, where they use it for agricultural purposes. Salty water can mineralize and make the grounds unfit for agriculture. The river also flows into the Don River and the Azov Sea.
The waters underground have no boundaries. They can flow freely even as far as hundreds of kilometers away. We could have a situation when suddenly the Azov Sea basin is poisoned. The Azov Sea area is poisoned, even the parts that are in Russia's Rostov region. It won't care about national borders, and without a doubt, Russia will have problems. It will lead to an international scandal.
Донецк снова пересекает границы Украины и продолжает свой путь по землям Ростовской области. У города Каменска Донецк становится судоходным. Отсюда по Донцу, Дону и дальше до Ростова и по Волго-Донскому каналу до самой Москвы идут пароходы, катера, самоходные баржи.
While preparing this film, we spoke with representatives of many institutions and state offices, including geologists, miners, and water specialists. Our aim was not to put blame on anybody, but we came to realize everyone can only do something on a limited scale. Ukrainian institutions primarily work in the same way and with the same resources as they did before the war, and each handles its own area. For example, geologists are responsible for the groundwater. Water Resources Department is responsible for all the bodies of water. The Donbas Water Enterprise guards the water in the centralized pipeline, but it isn't their task to clean the water if the river is contaminated. Miners aren't able to pump water in the areas where there is military action. Rescue workers alone cannot develop an action plan if an ecological catastrophe takes place even a couple of kilometers away, but on the separatist-held territories. The Donetsk Regional State Administration told us that they are planning to monitor the ecological situation, but they do it at their own initiative. The Ministry of Defense Ecological Safety Department sent us to the Ministry of Ecology. Some of these issues should be handled by the Ministry of Energy and Coal Mining, the Ministry of the Temporary Occupied Territories, and the Ministry of Finance.
Unfortunately, the Ecology Ministry that we have today is a Kyiv office with 200 employees. We don't have branches in other cities. Our function is to form policies, not controlling implementation or financing states through state programs for specific events. This is especially noteworthy because of this institution's lack of capability in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. In spite of that, we managed to successfully and effectively communicate with the regional administrations that carry out those functions through their own ecology departments, ecology inspection.
The Ecology Minister reassures us that his institution sees the threat. At the end of 2017, they received ecology research, which was conducted with OSCE participation. That research is based on Yevhen Yakovlev's expedition work.
The contamination that occurs on either side of the front line affects everyone, and worst of all, it doesn't just affect people living in the conflict zone, but those living far from it too. A huge portion of the mines are left in territories not under the Ukrainian government's control. It is clear that the Ukrainian government and its ministries or regional departments or ecological inspection bodies don't have access to the entire territory that is under threat.
There is also a state committee for industrial and ecological safety and emergency situations. It is headed by the Prime Minister. Essentially, it is the entire government, plus law enforcers, and the emergency services. But this committee had not been called to discuss the ecological threat in Donbas specifically.
The only protocol that exists today is the cooperation between the two sides about the ceasefire and using this ceasefire for our brigades to come out and liquidate any possible consequences and dangers left by the conflict. Unfortunately, we cannot expect what's left of our rescue teams in the areas of the Donbas not under state control to operate effectively. On the other hand, it is clear that they will also experience the negative consequences from the potential industrial disasters.
Who do you call if there is a catastrophe just over the contact line? The Joint Center for Monitoring and Coordination used to monitor the ceasefire process, but after Russia withdrew its forces, only the Minsk group is left. Despite all the state bodies saying there's cooperation with the military, the Ecology Minister's publication says that there is a lack of true interaction between the environmental agencies and the military. This is the Butovka mine. Hromadske was there in the summer of 2016. It is located to the north of Donetsk, not far from Avdiivka. There are Ukrainian military positions there. Due to constant shelling, the miners cannot work there.
Even if you're just a journalist, you need permission from the Ministry of Defense to cover this topic. They also need to grant permission for any kind of repairs to be done. But there is also a need to contact Russia and the Russian Ministry of Defense because they are present in the Donbas. Russia needs to face responsibility before our society and before the entire world for creating such a large-scale ecological problem. If we stay silent about this, Russia will just act as if there is no problem.
The biggest risk is all of this dragging on because of political issues and the war. It's easy to search for who's guilty, to accuse Russia of starting a war and the separatists of being careless. Yet it's hard to expect the Kremlin or separatists to handle these issues. Our task is not to scare people, it's to figure out an action plan at this stage. There is a lot that can be done: systematic monitoring, cancelling the ban of inspections of the economic objects in the conflict zone, developing a protocol of cooperation in case of a disaster. For instance, German scientists are looking for ways to reduce the costs of water pumping.
Pumping cannot be avoided. To the contrary, continued dewatering past the closure of the mine can be the most cost-effective and environmentally responsible way of dealing with mine water pollution, and the pumping itself can be optimized through a thorough planning and a modern pump system. In Germany, researchers are also working on a pumped energy storage system.
I am staying an optimist. There is a lot that can be done. First of all, an official analytical expert group can be created. Secondly, the monitoring system that is now dead needs to be restored. The satellite radar system allows us to assess changes in the sensitivity of the ground. Even a millimeter shift per year, that's as thin as a sheet of paper. Most of the non-government controlled territories and mines are at a higher elevation than the Siversky-Donetsk River, and if the water levels rise from 1 kilometer to 200 meters, the whole dirt mass will flow in our direction. We would have around 150 to 200,000 people actually or potentially displaced each year due to ecological problems.
Part of the Chernobyl exclusion zone has been restored because nature could extract resources from underground, from the soil. But the same can't happen in Donbas. There is only land full of holes caused by the mines. In the play, the Novhorodski kids brought to Kiev, living on the front line and anticipating an ecological disaster is just the background. They tell a story of love for a small mining village lost in a field by a chemical plant. These people did not flee their native town because of the war, in part because they have nowhere to go. But if we lose control over nature, it might just force them, and millions more, to leave.